We collectively are known as MOCHA. You might have seen us on LinkedIn. We've been going for around 7-8 months now, and we'll be talking to you all about psychological safety in the workplace. So have we got anything in the chat, guys? Did anyone want to have a read through any of our responses? So people we've got in and what their comments are on psychological safety?
Yeah, there's good stuff coming through the chat. People obviously having a go at putting in their sort of take on psychological safety, all in line with what I think we're going to pick out in the session. Creating safe spaces, people feeling safe to be vulnerable, to opening, sharing parts of themselves they haven't potentially felt comfortable before. Feeling taking out sort of feelings of being belittled, unable to speak up, how you're received professionally. We're getting loads in the chat that we'll pull out through the session as we go, and also in the follow-up. So keep that coming, please, because there's real gold in there.
Fantastic.
I am multitasking.
Okay.
I'm just sorry, I can't seem to be able to use the chat, so that's why I'm not adding to it.
If your window's not fully open, the full size of the screen, sometimes the little chat icon, you might not see it.
Okay, yeah, it's there, it just doesn't allow me to.
It tells you you're not allowed. Okay, bear with me, I'll check the settings in just a second.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I'll look at that then. Ed, if you can bring up our first poll for today, that would be great, and then I can look at the chat settings as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the poll setting, the link to the poll, our first poll of the session, is now in the chat. I don't know if we've got an email list in case people can't get into the chat where we can send that link. But essentially, hopefully, for now anyway, the majority of people can see that link in the chat. That'll take us over to Slido. And the first question is a really high-level one on purpose, which is simply, do you feel psychologically safe at work?
I've changed the chat settings, so hopefully that should be working now.
I'll repost the link just in case the people before. So let me know if that link's working and that you're able to go over to Slido and answer the first poll. Do you feel psychologically safe at work? It's working. We have 37 votes so far out of our audience of 77. So we'll give that a few minutes. We're up to 41 votes so far. Okay, so we've had 45 out of the 77. So just making sure that everybody can access that link. They're trickling in now. So last few minutes, if you can head over, if you haven't already, to the link in the chat and just answer poll number 1, our high level. Do you feel psychologically safe at work? So over to you, Sherry, in terms of how long you want that to run for. We're up to 54 votes in there, so a good proportion of the session has responded.
Excellent. So what are our results looking like?
So 75% of our audience today do feel psychologically safe at work. 22% do not, and 4% prefer not to say.
Okay. That's quite fascinating. But a lot of our audience is HR, so I imagine a lot of people are here to understand what they can then do to spread that psychological safety through their organisation. So that's great.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So we shall move on. So As I said, MOCHA makes up the four of us. This is just to give you a little bit more information about us before we start digging into today's session. We're all independent consultants, coaches, business owners across different specialisms. And I promise I will be quiet in a minute and let other people speak a bit more. But we joined forces last year. As I mentioned, that was actually we met through a CIPD session that these wonderful people did for me. We got along really well and we all had a common purpose. You know, we all want to make workplaces better. So MOCHA became a real sort of entity. It's an online community for people leaders, and they attend sessions like this every month held by us, various leadership topics. We have our YouTube channel, we have a podcast, we have a LinkedIn group, and I'll share all the links of those in the chat as well as we go through today. But additionally, we work collectively with businesses. We provide things like leadership development and support workshops. And what you'll see today is a condensed version of some of the workshops that we deliver. So I've told you a little bit about me already. My background is very much operational management, HR, health and safety. I'm an independent consultant. I support mostly small businesses and startups in the Thames Valley area. And I work predominantly in the science and tech space and looking at things, you know, people and business challenges through sort of early stage growth hurdles. And let me introduce you to Lisa, or let Lisa introduce herself, should I say.
Thanks so much, Sherry. So I'm Lisa Avery, and my background is positive psychology and coaching psychology. For those of you who might not know, positive psychology, it's the branch of psychology that looks at what can go right with people rather than what can go wrong with people. So it's looking to take people from 0, just about surviving, to +10, thriving. Whereas clinical psychology looked at, you know, what was wrong with people and how they could take people from -10 to just about 0. So we're looking at how we can help individuals and teams thrive in the workplace. I've worked with various organisations, schools, unis, charities, and so I just love working with individuals and teams to help them reach that point of personal and professional thriving. So it's really great to be here today, and thank you all for being a part of it. Thank you.
Excellent. Ed, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Ed Jervis. I'm the CEO of Inclusion Crowd. My background is transformation and change. So I support organizations with inclusion, diversity, representation, particularly front end. So bringing in talent and keeping talent. I set the business up because I was frustrated at D&I being treated as a woolly, fluffy add-on that sits predominantly as a HR problem to solve. And essentially we're burning out our HR folks trying to sort of sell these messages into organizations and getting the organizations to bite and demonstrate measurable, tangible difference and change. And so that's where we come in terms of supporting organizations through you know, a whole range of solutions to actually demonstrate that we've been talking about this for a very, very long time. What is it that you can demonstrate and point to? Can you define the problem? Do you know where you're going? And have we got the mechanisms, the governance, the structure, and the hearts and minds piece to allow organizations to get there? So that's sort of our sweet spot.
Okay, and Carlos.
You're on mute, Carlos.
I just realized that. Hi, good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Yeah, I mean, I went from a coaching career, which was called my name, Carlos Dean Coaching, and I got to the point where it didn't feel right to identify myself as just a coach, because there were so many other things that that I felt were important. And what I learned through 25 years of coaching at all levels within small and large organizations was that what really counts is when people feel united in what they're doing. And a lot of the conversations that I had was around, what does your work mean to you? What's important about it? And what I found was that people don't get enough chance to talk about the value that they feel they bring. Sorry, you can't hear.
Sorry, I think we've got somebody who isn't on mute. If you don't mind putting yourselves on mute until you come in to speak, if that's all right. Sorry, I think it was an accident, Carla.
Oh, thank you, Lisa.
Thanks.
So I found that having conversations with people around what does your work mean to you and why is that important to you personally means that people connect emotionally with why they're doing what they're doing, or they realize that what they're doing is not actually very important to them. And obviously in a team, if people don't agree on why they're doing what they're doing, why it's important to them, what it means to them, and there's no opportunity to have a dialogue around that, then that team cannot be unified in its effort towards achieving goals and working together. So authentic purpose was a name that felt more aligned with where I was heading. And interestingly enough, as the more I talked about engagement and connection in work, I attracted these three wonderful people who felt very similarly to me that relationships in work need to improve, especially between, if you like, the senior management, middle management, HR people, and grassroots, and how do we connect those people together? And I felt that it's all around the meaning of work to all of those people means that people are in the right organization doing the right things, or they're not. And that's a conversation that I put a key focus on, and people feeling safe to have those honest conversations with each other, so they can work out whether they're in the right place in the right work sector, working with the right people. So what we want to model today is, I feel that I've arrived in a place with these three guys where I've never felt more myself. I've never felt I can, be more relaxed. I feel joyful when I'm working with these guys. I feel understood. I feel that they want to hear my opinion and my views and my experience, and that's helped me grow in confidence over the last 7 or 8 months at a rate that I'm just super excited by. So what I hope that you get from working with us is not just content, but that you experience 4 people who really get on well, like each other, and care about the same kind of things, but come at it from a lot of different directions. And to me, that's the world of work that I'd like to nurture for everybody that I engage with.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Okay, so where do we start? So as I said, this content is taken from our full workshop, and in that we take you on a journey climbing this pyramid to understand who you are and who you want to be, and the practical steps you can take to embed psychological safety into your organizations. So if everyone can just go quickly to the reactions button, can you just give me a show of hands of who is familiar with Maslow's hierarchy already? Teams has disappeared. Okay, so we've got a few reactions. Fantastic. People in the waiting room as well. Okay, so this is a fantastic model. It's still very relevant today, and our focus today sits very much in the middle, so in this section here. But it's all about belonging, it's all about esteem, and how those needs are filled, not just in our work, but from our previous experiences, because that shapes who we are today as people, and that will really base the start of our discussions. And in addition to Maslow's model, excuse me, we can delve further into human psychology by looking at this model from MIT. So this is from Edgar Schein, introduced back in 1965. And what this does, it demonstrates culture and how without a visible, clear, safe culture, people make assumptions. And those assumptions are based on our own values and on our own lived experiences. We all make judgments multiple times a day in every decision that we make. And those decisions are based on our childhoods, our experiences, our beliefs, our values, our need to feel accepted. And that's why, as teenagers, we all make such bad decisions sometimes because we're focused on peer pressure. But psychological safety was defined here as a way to make employees feel secure and be capable of changing their behaviour in response to organisational change. Lisa, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, for me, Sherry, psychological safety, it's about being able to show up as our full selves. Human beings are emotional beings. And oftentimes I feel in workplaces we're asked not to bring our emotions to the table. But what we know from psychology is that whatever we repress will always grow stronger. And so the ability to show up as we are, articulate our real lived emotional truth at any moment, that will instantly free the person from that which they're experiencing. It will help them connect in a meaningful way with the other humans around us, because the other humans around us have emotions too. And equally, you know, that will just free people, that will help connect people, and that will help people just move on and deal with other matters. But I think whilst ever emotions are slightly taboo, whilst ever, you know, cultures celebrate positivity more than humans' real lived emotional truths, then we're all going to suffer. So for me, psychological safety, in answer to your question, it's that ability to show up as we are and express our full emotional truths as human beings. And there's so many benefits that come with that that we'll tap into later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, beyond definitions, it is very simply a place to feel safe to get things wrong sometimes. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and a psychologically safe environment works on supporting people through that. One person might make a mistake and simply not feel concerned because their values, because of their lived experiences. Another person might experience extreme anxiety. How we work that into our people processes is quite challenging, especially as your organisation grows and becomes larger. But here I've highlighted a book for anyone that does want to dig a bit more into the topic and about the meaning of psychological safety. Amy Edmondson is from Harvard Business School and is really kind of seen as the psychological safety guru. And I will pop a link to that in the chat as well shortly. So we saw at the start of Maslow's pyramid what we have as basic needs. And before we can really talk about psychological safety, and as much as that's the topic of today, you can't get to psychological safety without a feeling of basic safety, without your security being met. So I follow somebody on LinkedIn in the health and safety space who is absolutely amazing and who's fighting for women's rights in construction. And her name is Catherine Evans, and she runs a sort of a community awareness group called Boulders Brass, so well worth looking into. And she works in the construction sector, really highlighting some of the basic, simple safety issues that are just not available, predominantly to women, because they're a minority in that industry. So I've used some of these images from her just to really highlight the issues that can go on and how we need to tackle these fundamental issues before we can start to even think about anything else.
Gary,
So
can I chip in here? I think it's really fascinating what you're saying, and it touches on what Lisa was saying around what it is to bring your full self. And I think that when we think of physical needs and physical environment, we think of things like, clean toilets, and we think about, that there's no danger and health and safety issues and all the rest of it. But what it also brings up for me is that a lot of people in work are really frightened of losing their jobs and not being able to pay just to have a roof over their head, and not have enough money to keep the food on the table for the children. So I think that when it comes to bringing your full self, a lot of people are worried about speaking out because there's such an attachment to not losing their job, because those physical needs, to have money to get on the bus, to put fuel in the car, at a very basic level, is what I would say the majority of people are feeling obligated to go to work. They have to feed themselves. They have to meet those physical needs. Now, when the company's going through difficulty or when they're having stress at work, those feelings of, this person could jeopardize my career, can bring up real feelings of anger, feelings of frustration, and when Lisa was saying, it's about bringing your full self, I think when we talk about psychological safety, people can sense that sometimes someone's having a hard time with these basic physical needs, or are worried about them because they've had another child, and therefore those kind of powerful feelings, if we don't support people to say, how are you doing at that physical level? Are you worried about your job? Are you able to pay your bills? If someone isn't sort of asking at that basic level, it's like we assume because we live in a first world country that everybody's sorted in that way. And I think that's the most dangerous assumption we can make, because a lot of people are very worried most of the time around just meeting basic physical needs of themselves and their loved ones. I just wanted to add that in there around, can they bring those worries to work? Can they talk about that? Can they share those frustrations and the potential for anger between staff when people seem to be jeopardizing, you know, the security around that income that they need for their basic needs. So I just wanted to bring that to this stage of the conversation.
And can I just add to that for 10 seconds, Sherry, if that's all right? I think it's really interesting what you say, Carlos, because also we've got to consider there's a massive intersection between the emotional, psychological, and the physical. So there's some really compelling research by a guy, if you haven't ever come across him, he's a Hungarian psychologist, really incredible man, Dr. Gabor Mate. We can send you any links that are of interest. And he shows that when human beings do not express their real lived emotions at any one time, they are suppressing their immune system at that moment. So imagine if you're showing up on a daily basis and you are unable to express that anger, that frustration, that fear, you are suppressing, potentially compromising your immune system. Okay, if it's one day, a couple of days, it might not be consequential, but imagine if that's for an extended period of time. So I think, you know, as we're ascending this hierarchy here, we've got to see they completely overlap. They're not separated. They're not independent factors. The emotional, psychological, and physical all work together. And I think we need to understand that and understand the importance of letting people express what they're really experiencing at any moment. Sorry, Sherry, I hope that's okay.
No, it's great. You know, it's really great to get involved in the conversation. They're such relevant points, because what I've put here is the most basic. It really is. And there's so many examples of how some organizations are not getting that right, but there are so many layers to it. And it's really important that we highlight that. I mean, we've got, you know, a situation here is this main picture is, as you can see, it took me 15 minutes to get out of a toilet. You can see they're using toilets as storage, and that's the perception. That's how women are being treated in this particular occasion by the construction industry, because they're just seen as insignificant. The top one is an actual case from the health and safety executive, where they came into this business and they said, this is not acceptable, you've got to change it. And the business did nothing, to the point where it then, you know, went to court. But they didn't even have any running water. So if organizations are at that level, really just not caring about people's physical needs, then what chance do we have to create a psychologically safe environment?
Yeah, and I think the point that Lisa and I are making alongside that, Sherry, is that do the people feel safe to get angry about those conditions? You know, this is the point, that people will tolerate things within their organizations, whether it's bullying, whether it's, you know, abuse of power, whether it's, you know, feeling frightened of certain people because they seem to be close to the boss, and all of these things, you know, and unsafe situations. Can they speak out? I mean, I work with an arborist company that were risking their lives every single day. And I remember talking privately with one of them who said to me, you know, some of this stuff you're doing, Carlos, is absolute hogwash, because the reality is, here we are paying you to talk about coaching and the culture and everything else, but we've got ladders that are fundamentally unsafe. And we know they're unsafe as practitioners, but we're frightened to say anything about it, because we'll just be told, well, you go and pay for new ladders then, because I can't afford it. So it's the safety to talk about what we feel is wrong and include people in an understanding of what is safe, what people are willing to tolerate, what standards we want to experience, rather than leaving it to HR or leaving it to, you know, senior leadership. If people don't bring their critique on the environment of their work because they don't feel safe to bring it, then actually people are out of touch with the reality of what's going on. And that's the bigger issue for me.
And that brings us to topics like quiet quitting as well, doesn't it? It's people that would rather just disappear out of an organization than continue to be in that environment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Another sort of nuanced level from my work around actually who is in those spaces and who has proximity to power, and do I see people that look like me in these spaces? Are these spaces potentially hostile? Do people like me succeed? Are we set up for success? Do we see ourselves reflected in the C-suite, in the executive groups? You know, the safety to just inhabit the spaces is something that can be challenging to many different groups within society, those that are marginalized, those that are underrepresented. And when they go into organizations that don't reflect them and don't reflect society, or maybe more at entry level than they do as we go up the hierarchy, they have a really compounding impact on their feeling of safety and are my needs being met. And you mentioned toilets come up so often for so many different groups, from physical accessibility to facilities right through to who can use them, who is using them, a whole range of things around the physical setting in which you inhabit. And I think it's a really interesting conversation that we'll probably draw out as we go deeper, but certainly about how you show up, how you can show up in those spaces will, from the very entry level of the pyramid, influence how safe you are. And all those physical elements are part of that, but equally where you see yourself and your ability to inhabit those spaces is critical in establishing at the early offset about how we bring people to that middle section around feeling psychologically safe.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple of people with their hands up. I don't know if they wanted to ask a question or if they're just still up from earlier, but we've got Julie Saunders. Did you want to ask a question?
No,
Nope.
I'm sorry, I put it up by accident. I was just
Okay.
saying that I'd seen the graph earlier. Sorry.
That's okay. And then Laura Wrench, is it the same situation, or did you want to ask a question?
No, sorry, that's from earlier.
All right, no worries. Thank you. Thought I'd check. Okay. So the thing is, I've just highlighted the UN SDGs here for anyone that is or is not familiar with them. They're really worth looking into, because as much as they sort of tie into sustainability and the sort of world's view of the goals to become more sustainable as a planet, but it's not all about the environmental side of things. There's a huge human element to sustainability as well, and that's something that I do a lot in my work, but just they're well worth looking into if anyone's not familiar with them. Okay, so Ed, I'm going to hand over to you for this one. Oh, you're on mute, Ed.
Of course I am. So how we measure it, just because we can measure it, does that mean that we should? Can we discuss different issues and problems within your team? Do you feel comfortable sharing new ideas? Do you fear retaliation? If you make a mistake, do people talk about mistakes in a way that they can learn from them? So for me personally, I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. And so when I think of psychological safety, my default is to a sense of community and, a sense of spaces in which you can find sort of, moments of safety, live normal lives, do normal things, but against a backdrop of violence. Both my parents became very close to being blown up on 2 separate occasions just by making a different decision. They both missed. My mother just left a restaurant before it blew up, and my father was using a payphone when a car bomb exploded and the engine block of a car landed next to him. So my background is forged in how do you allow people to thrive, live normal lives, to succeed, to do what they need to do against a backdrop that is potentially hostile. And I suppose the commercial reflection of that is, if the organization, if people are set up to hit targets, to achieve objectives, all organizations, all teams, every workplace has its challenge, from market fluctuations, tight deadlines, unexpected roadblocks. That's all part of the game. But what separates successful teams from the rest isn't just about talent resources. It's about something much deeper. And I think that this question about, are we talking a good game? Is it a bullshitty term that we throw around, particularly, in the environments that we all work in around, psychologically safe? Is psychologically, it's become a real buzzword, but what does it actually mean? And I suppose I'm giving these examples around how in teams we create spaces where it really exists. Do we role model what it's like to be vulnerable? I've had a couple of examples recently. My husband and I are currently adopting our second child, and I've got a lot going on, and I don't really feel top of my game. And I was in a couple of situations with clients recently, and I just wasn't on my game. And I asked myself, we talk about vulnerability, but in my team and in the people I was trying to influence and in the people that mattered in these commercial sensitive situations, vulnerability wasn't attractive. They weren't looking to me to be vulnerable. They were looking to me to be very confident, to be across the answers, to be in a position to drive what needs to be delivered. And actually, me not being on my game, did I feel in a position that I could be vulnerable about the fact, that I have this stuff going on in my life? So there's a difference between throwing psychological safety around and talking about it in these very high level terms and understanding commercially what it looks and feels like to be in spaces that you are safe to show up. As a gay man, that has an influence on the fact that there isn't a lot of C-suite senior folks in organizations that feel comfortable to be out. I talk to a lot of, LGBT people who say, well, actually, we do a lot of business in the Middle East. And there is a sort of subtle pressure, to sort of dial that down because we hold influential positions within the organization, and it could have an influence in some of the territories which we operate, some of our biggest geographies, some of our biggest clients. That is today in 2024. So is it safe for those people to be authentically themselves? And the question that I ask is, as leaders, if we are juggling that, to what extent are we really role modeling it? So if this comes down to, from an emotional intelligence spectrum, the ability for us to role model those things in order for others to feel safe in our presence to do that, then ultimately that's something that we need to factor into this decision about how we're measuring it. And I'll touch on this point and then we'll explore it as we go through. But when I think of psychological safety, I think of the family unit that I come from. And that's not applicable for everybody. Different families, different shapes and sizes, different lived experiences and so on. But when I think now of whether it's the family environment you came from or potentially the family environment you're trying to create for your own family, or the relationships that you hold as important, we have the skills, to be able to look at how do we create spaces for people to learn? How do we create spaces for people to make mistakes? And one of the things that I look for is something that Lisa talks about actually, which is in commercial teams, toxic positivity. And to the previous points that Carlos and Lisa were talking about there, particularly when Lisa brought up Gabor Mate, is what does it sound like? Managed by walking about. What do you hear? Do you hear a suppression of critical voices? Are they deemed as the moaners and the people who aren't really bought into the team mission, and they're always complaining, and we just need positive people and we need to get on with it, and we've got big challenges and all this? What do you hear from managing by walking about? What does those high, if you're looking for high performance in teams, what are you physically experiencing on the ground? And is it an environment in which critical thinking exists? And also, if it is or isn't, who are we looking to that's doing it well, or where is there a vacuum of silence? And I think that I leave that there because I know we're going to blow it out and open it out as we go further. But I think for me, that's sort of an introduction into how we start to really look commercially on the ground, how it's showing up and how it looks and feels. Yeah, we'll we'll continue that as we go through.
Okay, Carlos, you've got your hand up. You're on mute, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. That was a great journey to go on with you and arrive at that place of, where's our starting point? There's two takeouts for me there. When I read the question, how do we measure it? The second question comes up for me, which is, where do we go in ourselves to answer that question? So if I was to say to myself, how do I know if I'm feeling psychologically safe? Where do I go to find my answer? And my answer is go to what I'm feeling. What I've realized is a lot of people disconnect from their feelings in work. They don't feel safe, so they disconnect. So to actually ask someone, do you feel safe? They say, well, what do you mean? Well, do you feel safe? Well, how do I know? What does that feel? What does that look like? Whether I feel safe or not? And since I've done a lot of work in staying open to the social environment of my life and my work, I experience a lot of anxiety. And I used to think anxiety was a mental health symptom. And what I realized, anxiety is not a mental health symptom. Anxiety is that much of the time I'm not safe. Much of the time there are people around me that are feeling upset or angry or dissatisfied, as Ed was saying, with the situations that I find myself in with them. But what I'm fearful of, and what the anxiety is that those feelings are repressed. Those feelings are not being explored or being listened to, and there isn't a space for people to look at, well, what is the dissatisfaction? And I think that what I've learned from customer service and client service is that we put so much sort of focus on making sure that the services we offer support the needs of the clients that we're working with. And I've emerged into a mindset that as part of a team, we're in service to each other all the time. And if someone that you're working with is unhappy about something and unsatisfied about something, then it's about caring to find out what is it that you're unhappy about. Because if you're unhappy, I'm connected to you, and your unhappiness and your dissatisfaction is affecting me because I'm part of the same emotional network that you're in, very intimate network, which is tied into sustaining income, sustaining the environment that we all rely on, and creating meaningful work in service to the communities that we're part of. So is psychological safety, to me, is measured by, are people in touch with their feelings, firstly, so that they can bring their authentic feelings, and are they able to bring the negative authentic feelings, which are normally the things that need addressing, because the positive stuff is working. It's the negative stuff that isn't working. But as Ed said, and Sherry, if everybody has to be upbeat and pretend to be positive all the time, then where is all that dissatisfaction and negativity going to? And that's, I think, the critical crisis that we're in, not just organisationally, but globally. There isn't an outlet for authentic dissatisfaction to be taken seriously and to be folded back into improvements around culture, engagement, communication and teamwork. That's my concern. Thank you.
Can I just add at this point, Carlos? I think that's such an important point, because for those of you who aren't aware, and you might well be aware, but human beings have an innate negativity bias. So where there's potentially good and bad in this life, we will always first notice the bad, because that is what can endanger our survival emotionally, psychologically, or practically speaking. You know, it's a useful thing in so many ways, but I think it's a really important point that you make, Carlos, in the sense that if we've got this bias and we are noticing the bad or focusing on it, it's kind of ironic that that is the thing that we've got to repress or suppress, you know, and at what price. Now, we're not saying here that positive emotions aren't welcome and they aren't useful. We'll speak towards the end of the session about how to cultivate more of that, because that's really useful. We know that when human beings are feeling positive emotions, they're more open, more creative, more collaborative. So we are not anti-positive emotions, but what we are saying is that humans have to show up with the full human condition to the workplace. So I hope that was just something to think about. And also as individuals, you know, at any given moment, just notice your reaction and ask yourself, am I being hijacked by the negativity bias here? Because oftentimes we are. So it's just quite a useful thing to think about too, I think. Back over to you, Sherry. Thank you.
Okay. We've actually got a question in the chat. So Lizzie's asked, I'm just starting a research project on employee satisfaction and workplace learning and development strategies. I'd like to delve into analysing this. Any suggestions?
For me, when I work with clients on this, they always say to me, I have an annual or biannual survey. I might have some apps that we use that gives at a team level some weekly pulse stuff. We collaborate it and we use that as the basis for our surveys and our engagement. I always say to them, let us show you the difference between that and facilitated anonymized conversational sessions. Let us take different levels across your organization and let's go in and have genuine conversations. Carlos talked interestingly about an example in where they were using ladders and the ladders were the issue, and actually you were hawking in and flogging all of your sort of strategic objectives, and let's talk about diversity or inclusion, or let's talk about personal development, or let's actually all they're interested in is the ladders. And there's so much of that lost in the operational landscape, the frozen middle management, the paralysis around feedback, all of that has become something that we're keen to codify. And I think that the data that comes off the back of that is obviously critical, but the getting at it, I think we could be more agile around how we go in, how we have those conversations, how we collect that data, and how we really expose what operational landscapes look and feel like for people, whether it's, oh, for God's sake, here's HR with another survey, or here's, whatever else. And yes, here's the topics. Do I think I'm going to leave in 6 months, or do I feel that my boss listens to me, or or whatever it is. Actually, there's a whole wealth of intelligence that sits from those types of facilitated, roll your sleeves up, really understand your operational landscapes, that will add incredible value to the surveys and so on. And I think we've become quite complacent to a survey culture. We hear quite often about survey fatigue, and not another survey. And actually, what do they do with it? And even if we do a good, you said we did kind of campaign, how does anybody really care about that at the front line? How does it make a difference to how I rock up into this place and spend my time and do my job? So that's where I come at, really getting underneath that data and really understanding and challenging that we don't do things the way we've always done them, and that we get after intelligence that's operationally specific.
Can I just sum up there? Forgive me, Lisa. Can I just sum up there that what we're really saying is sometimes surveys are an avoidance technique, I think, for having real raw conversations with the people that matter. I think what we need to be able to do more and more is understand that organizational experience is unsatisfactory and imperfect. And just by having conversations around, okay, what needs to be improved, and let's have an honest dialogue around that, is about engagement with your people and having real conversations with people, and not being frightened of people's honest views, and then maybe summarizing the findings within that operational landscape to look at what priorities are in addressing those things. Again, it's back to, we're frightened of each other as people. We don't feel safe to ask those big questions and get the honest answers out. And so we have all of these corporate methodologies, which really could be addressed far more simply, sitting down and having, honest, facilitated, prioritized conversations with people, and that always seems to work in the experience that I've had.
And I just wanted to add to that for a second, if I could, Carlos. If anybody's interested in exploring the kinds of things you might like to measure for in terms of engagement, satisfaction, there's a wealth of free resources at the University of Pennsylvania's website. That is the home of positive psychology, and it's at AuthenticHappiness.com. And you can find lots of different kinds of things that you might measure for. My favorite, it's a framework we're going to show you in a couple of minutes, but just to give you a bit of a preview, it's looking at the 5 things that human beings need to thrive personally and professionally, which are positive emotions, engagement, great relationships, sense of meaning, and sense of accomplishment. And there are some really great free surveys you can use there that I think might be helpful in this kind of study or inquiry.
I just had a quick follow-up. So there was a question in the comments from Lizzie. The irony is that those that don't feel psychologically safe will not speak their truth or even complete the survey. And I think that speaks to what we're getting across here, which is actually, how do we get at that? Anonymized, facilitated, being agile, being creative about how we get that. Really preparing the landscape properly for what are we going to do about it? How do we influence that? Where does my voice show up? All of that work is exactly the point we're making here. So thanks for that, Lizzie.
Yeah, and I think what we're also saying is that, you know, this thing about creating the conditions for psychological safety isn't something that you can just learn to do. I mean, there's people, you know, in our team that have spent 2 decades working to understand psychological safety, to bring real authenticity in a coaching environment, or in a conflict management situation, or in, you know, sensitivities around salary and everything else. You know, these skills, you can't assume that everybody's got them. And I think it's really important to have impartial agencies like the group of us and what we're launching and what we're all about, to understand when, you know, people are anxious and they're not feeling safe, so that if you set up a meeting to talk about some important matters, you need to be able to evaluate whether that meeting's going well, and you need to have a very good emotional radar to actually know whether the culture of that meeting is, you know, going to support the kind of outcomes that that meeting was set up for in the first place. And in my experience, a lot of the time, if certain people are in the room, those meetings are going to be sabotaged, because there is a natural discomfort around certain people that are known to the other staff team members. And we have to be able to read the room, and we have to be there to safeguard, you know, that the conditions for that meeting to be really authentic, so the information and the data that comes out of that meeting is useful. Otherwise, it's compromised. And if it's compromised, then you can't make decisions on half truths. You can only make decisions on actually what's going on. And that's our challenge, I think.
I once heard a really interesting idea that I loved, actually, that connected to this, Carlos. And the idea was, when you were sitting in pretty much an echo chamber, you know, people not really able to do anything but agree, it's a good idea to appoint the devil's advocate. So literally choose one person who will be the voice of dissent in that meeting. And I thought that was a really, really fun and nice way, a safe way of actually getting some of the truth, or some of the, you know, the dissent, or the lack of certainty to what else was being shared in the space. I don't know if anybody's ever tried anything like that, but I think that could be a really nice way to go about it.
Yeah, I use the 6 thinking hats. So you can Google the 6 thinking hats, and that's exactly what you're saying, a commercial tool based on that psychological approach, about having different people with different motivations and agendas in the meeting, or in the decision making, or at the gates, who play different roles, wear different hats, and it's super effective.
Excellent. And yeah, I think, you know, the whole sort of purpose of this slide, in terms of how do you measure psychological safety, is an incredibly challenging thing to do, because you will have some people that don't want to speak up. But the best you can do as an organisation is try to make sure that you anonymise it, and make sure it's clearly anonymous, so that you're building the trust that you're not going to secretly see those responses. And it's asking questions like the ones that we've got on the screen as well. It's, you know, how do they feel communicating with their line managers? How do they feel about their team? There's a lot of different areas you can go into that are probably already done in a lot of surveys that do link back to psychological safety. But as Ed said, one of the key things really is those conversations, the real human conversations that you can have. And even things like having a little suggestion box. You know, it might seem like an old school technique, but it's something that I found worked really well in the past. They can just put a comment in the box. And the key to building the culture upwards in terms of psychological safety is to show that you are responding to that. Not just, you know, here's the responses to the survey, it's here's what we're doing, here's when we're going to do it by. And that shows that you're really taking them seriously and you're listening to their opinions. So Carlos, do you want to lead on this one?
Sure. How does psychological safety affect individuals, teams, and the business? Yeah, I think what we're saying here is that we can look at it from an individual point of view, a team point of view, and the overall organisation. So, from an individual's point of view, we've all experienced either, you know, full psychological safety or deficits in psychological safety as we're growing up. So our experience of group, and when you're in an organization, you're with other people. So your experience of a group is socialized very much from your experience of coming into a family environment. And whether that family environment was supportive, whether there were deaths in the family, whether there was conflict in the family, and we can't assume that we've all had similar experiences, as Ed described. I mean, wow, you know, to grow up in that kind of environment, you know, you think about the wars, the big wars. The whole world was in a state of trauma in those wars, and that affected many generations and many families because we didn't know whether we were going to get bombed or killed. So all of these you know, things affect us on an individual level. Then we take our own socialization that we've had, and we put, say, a group of 10 people together in a team, and what happens on the surface is only part of the story. You know, Carl Jung brought to us the concept of the unconscious very early on, and it's a bit like the iceberg. You've got the tip of the iceberg, which is what people are saying and what people are conscious of, and then you've got all the other stuff that sits underneath the ground. And when you think about what's going on underground in our relationships with others in a team, you really start to get an idea of how much is not being said, or how much is the person or the people in the team unconscious of the triggers or the judgments that are going on towards other people in the team. And therefore, they're not actually getting on. On the face of it, everybody's got a great front, everybody's got their corporate face on, their professional face on, but actually, you know, they're there for the money, they're there for the promotion, they're there for the career, and they're not really in a relationship with the people with any sort of meaningful foundation or any, you know, safety to really be honest about their lives, who they are, what their aspirations and dreams are, and what they're caring about in the job. It's just not happening. So, you know, all sorts of spectrums of that is going on within teams. And then the business as a whole is a set of different departments and a different set of teams. Teams that are all interdependent on each other's competence and performance and collaboration and cooperation. So we're really looking at psychological safety being the foundation of really building true engagement, authenticity, cooperation, listening and understanding, so that people's relationships are on a progression of improvement. And someone needs to be, you know, asking themselves week in, week out, week out, month in and month out, year in and year out, in terms of progression. You know, we've got delivery of services, we've got profit, but how are our relationships developing? Are they improving? How do we know they're improving? Or are they corroding, which in my experience is often the case because of politics, because of, you know, misunderstandings, because of fear of difference that exists between people. So unless we start taking seriously that the social environment of work is the foundation on which we can be successful individually, as teams and as organizations, and that we need a foundation of psychological safety to progress, to improve those relationships, then we're going to continue to create the dysfunctional waste of resources at a time when we really do need to work together to resolve some of the major challenges that are going to affect us way beyond individual needs, team needs, and in fact organizational needs, because we've now got some global challenges that we all need to pull together on. So togetherness and unity can only happen with psychological safety. That's what we're saying here.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Lisa, I will hand over to you.
Brilliant. So thanks, Sherry. Starting to think then about what we can do to nurture this culture of psychological safety. Well, first of all, before we address that, I think we've got to ask ourselves, what do human beings need? What else do human beings need beyond those basic needs? And you know, there's this thing in psychology called self-determination theory, and it says that human beings need three things, right? They need to feel autonomous, so free in their choices. They need to feel really connected to others, and they need to feel as competent and empowered as possible at every single point. And here we're looking at two almost conflicting needs, in the sense that human beings need to be celebrated for their unique individual selves, but they need to belong. You know, we're born to belong in some way, shape, or form. We evolved as packs, we evolved to be in tribes. So we need to be unique and individual, yet we need to feel a part of the bigger picture. And I think that our biggest challenge, really, as an employer, as a leader, it's to help people feel both of these things. Now, my suggestion in terms of understanding a person's unique individual traits, qualities, strengths, it's to do something with your teams, which is the VIA, Values in Action Signature Strengths Survey. Again, you can find this at the home of positive psychology, which is Authentic Happiness, which we'll put in the chat in a second. If you can help people identify their unique individual strengths, then you can help them see what is good about them, you know, what can be challenging about them, because all too often when our strengths are overplayed, they can become slight weaknesses, they can become slightly detrimental. So if you can help people get a sense of what's good about them, and then you can help people see how their strengths can feed into the bigger picture. You know, a great way to connect people, to connect teams, it's creating a vision. Where's your team going? Where's your company going? But when you've created that bigger picture vision, helping every individual see how their unique strengths feed into that, I think is so helpful. You get the best of both worlds, the unique individual input and the bigger picture and sense of belonging, sense of unity. So I think for me, that's a really important starting point, looking at how every individual can help shape this culture and bring this culture to life. Thank you. If we can go to the next slide, please.
So let's talk toxic workplaces. So I would love, if you're comfortable to do so, pop in the chat any times when you've experienced any of these points that we've put on this slide here, or any other behaviours that you considered part of a toxic workplace culture. And while you're doing that, Carlos, I'm sure you've got some stories to add on this topic.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you. Yeah, and I think in the same balance, and I'll bring Lisa in here to balance this out, is that I think in order to understand what true toxicity is, we need to understand what is the vision for a really healthy experience of work. You know, what does it feel like to be in a place where, you know, you feel that you belong, that you feel loved and cared for by the people around you because of the contributions you make to their working life and therefore to their personal life. So I'm going to start answering that question, Sherry, by talking about my experience of working with you three, because I could fairly say that in most of my career, I found myself moving from job to job, eventually became an autonomous coach. And even as with a degree of autonomy, I was still subservient to the clients I worked with, and found that sometimes within only 6 months, sometimes a matter of a few years, even though I had seemingly the autonomy to, you know, control my own agenda and choose who I engaged with, my need to earn money meant that I was working with organizations that had issues of toxicity, and that the CEO often was the last person who wanted to talk with me, because they were actually the person that was actually creating a lot of the problems, because they weren't listening, they weren't connecting, they weren't vulnerable in their relationships with the people even on their boards. And so eventually when I flagged that and challenged that, I lost that engagement. So, you know, that became very demoralizing. I think I went through a period of burnout in wanting to help the good people that I met on those engagements. Some really beautiful people, hardworking people, people who cared about their customers, cared about their colleagues. And I found sanctuary by working with those people. But I knew all the time that the things that were really causing the problems and the toxicity were people who were reluctant to be confronted by the part that they were playing in those situations. So even with my seeming autonomy and empowerment as a free agent, I eventually had to take the courage to challenge these people, deliver my insight into what was actually going on. And, every time, there was no exception, either immediately on a couple of occasions or over a 3 to 6 month period, my relationship with the person who'd brought me in became really, really broken because they felt affronted. They weren't willing to accept some of the things that I'd brought to them, which had been gathered over a period of months, sometimes years, because they didn't want to grow as a human being. They didn't want to grow into being a better person for the sake of their organization and their teams. So that demoralization, as I came out of that a few years ago, changed my focus. And now I'm looking at the imagination and the possibility of what it would feel like to have a wonderful experience of work. And funnily enough, as soon as I've changed my mindset from focusing on toxicity to focusing on the beauty of service-orientated work that is collaborative, that is supportive, that is inspiring, that does make you feel like getting up every morning, more of that is coming into my world. And again, I mentioned the 3 people that I work with here today. I've only known them 7 or 8 months, and I don't really know them. I know elements and aspects about them, but what I witness is their commitment. I witness their passion, their enthusiasm, their forgiveness when we've done faux pas online in front of audiences, and the debriefing we do together and the understanding that is growing between us. And those are the kind of relationships that's possible everywhere. But I think you need to have somebody spearheading that. You need to have someone who really holds that imagination, holds that vision for allowing people to flourish, and who knows what that feels like. If you've never felt it, how can you create it? If you don't know what a yogurt looks like, how can you go and buy a yogurt? If we don't know what a culture is that is full of love and care and connection and meaningful work and inspired by your colleagues and admire them for their courage in speaking out against things that need to be spoken out about, then how can you grow something when you don't know what it is? So I think that I'd rather fill my time to answer that question with that first, and then I'll just say that I've experienced huge examples of toxicity where people are terrified of their bosses, where I've witnessed people, literally trembling to talk about things to me, and starting to bring stories that have just brought me to tears. And when I've asked them, well, why have you put up with that? It's always, I'm too frightened to leave because my self-esteem and confidence has been so eroded. I'm not sure I could get another job anywhere anyway. So better the devil I know than and actually there's other people here I really love and care. So if I leave because of that, I don't just lose my income and I'm in an insecure situation, but I actually lose relationships with a whole load of other people that I really care about. And there's a lot of people in that dilemma, a lot of people. And again, in the more we can bring this to a high profile situation like this within CIPD, and I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity again to speak with you guys, the more I think people will grow the courage to break through that tolerance of these kinds of things and speak out. And we need good HR, we need good middle management, and we need good leaders that will listen to that to break these people out of the oppression of the circumstances that they find themselves in, because it's unacceptable.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been amazing, Carlos, seeing your journey and learning more about you over these last 8 months as well. There's an interesting comment in the chat. So somebody's mentioned about potentially a controversial comment, which actually I don't think is controversial at all. I think it's stuff that we see all the time in the work that we do about toxic workplaces, and the impressions that they give you when you go to apply for jobs. People that put all these wonderful things about how good they are with EDI, how they have these great values that they use for marketing purposes, but on the inside things are very, very different. I've been there, I've worked in those places, And you'll certainly see me on LinkedIn getting quite aggravated about those sorts of businesses as well. It's one of my real hates of when you see that sort of stuff, and on the inside it's just absolutely rotten. Yeah, it's everywhere, and I think as HR professionals you see these things so often as well, and it's so hard to create your own psychological safety and maintain your own mental well-being when you're having to deal with these situations, because you go into HR generally because you care, and you go into it for the people element. And I've seen how hard it can be, and that some HR professionals almost go into a transactional mode, because I think at some point it's just, you either have to conform or move on, and that fear of moving on, like Carlos said, is so very real that you just kind of become almost a robot in your job. And I mean, HR has got quite a bad name in some areas, hasn't it, for almost being that transactional policing type. But I don't think that's the intention, and I don't think that's where HR wants to be, or at least certainly the HR professionals I know. They're there because they care about people. So I'm going to shut up because I'm conscious of time and we need to move on a little bit. So Lisa, can you talk to us a bit more about belonging? Let's make it a bit more positive.
Absolutely. Well, actually, what just struck me as I looked at the previous slide, I guess for me at the heart of all of this is relationships. There is nothing more important than relationships. And we know this from what we call the Harvard Grant Study. Take a peek, there's a really cool TED talk on this. But basically, they looked at Harvard graduates, so like the age of 19, 20, 21, and it looked at them from that age till the age that they died, so in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And what the study wanted to do was look at what made for a good life, a happy life, a successful life by all metrics. And they found, without any shadow of a doubt, the only predictor to positive life outcomes for all of these guys, regardless of their social background, their IQ, how much money their families had and the likes, the only predictor of positive life outcomes was the quality of their closest personal and professional relationships. Like, that is more important than absolutely anything. So if relationships are the greatest predictor to anything, what sits behind these relationships? What makes people have good relationships? It's their level of emotional intelligence. And I think emotional intelligence is something we've really got to highlight in the workplace. What sits behind emotional intelligence? Self-awareness. What do you need to get self-awareness? You need the time and space to openly reflect. So I guess I'd invite you and I'd ask you, what do you do? How do you create spaces in which people are able to reflect, are able to share? Because again, we process by speaking, by thinking, by talking. So where are people invited into these spaces where they can openly share? That was just a little thought that came from the previous slide. But in terms of this slide here, well, again, it comes back to relationships, isn't it? And sadly, we know from psychology, there's this thing called compression management, which is exactly what it says. People, when they're surrounded by their superiors, in inverted commas, often are overtly self-aware, self-conscious. They're not able to relax and really be themselves. Again, when we're experiencing negative emotions like fear, anxiety, we get tunnel vision. Positive emotions, they've proven from psychology, literally open people's peripheral vision, literally metaphorically speaking too, so that people are able to be more open, more creative, more collaborative. But when people live in cultures, toxic cultures of fear, not being able to voice their emotional truths, they get this kind of tunnel vision because human beings just see the danger or threat that lies ahead. So when it comes to working with people that we don't feel comfortable with or safe around, we're going to be highly self-conscious, which really closes people down, and I think that's such a problem. I think it's really useful that as leaders or as people with some influence, we're able to model that vulnerability in a safe way. We know that people who are perceived to have the most power, they're the people who kind of we copy. So there's this thing called emotional contagion, and it shows that the people with the most power in any group, it is their emotions that will dictate the emotional climate of the rest of the group. So if your leader's coming in a really, really bad mood, it's highly likely that you're picking up on that. And again, that will close down the group in terms of how open they feel, how honest they're able to be. So becoming very aware, if you are in a position of authority, of what you're modeling. And when we're talking about vulnerability here, we're talking about you showing up and sharing in a safe way what you're genuinely thinking, what you're genuinely feeling, and welcoming other people's input into that. Yeah, we've got quite a few things coming up in the chat. Ed, Sherry, Carlos, did you want to add any practical ideas or thoughts around this?
I just saw some themes in the chat that are linking to what we're talking about. So a lot on bullying comes up, that disconnect between what we say and what we do, the schmoozy external profile versus what it looks like internally. I think that underpins what we've been saying previously about really getting at what operational landscapes look and feel like, and how you get at that. And how you create the safety for people to engage in that. And if that is third parties, if that is anonymized, facilitated stuff, then that's really helpful. Bullying, toxicity, senior level, behaviors that for some reason, when we put a corporate cloak around them, we think that they don't exist in professional, large, modern organizations. And I think that we take the human being, as in the mammal, and human behaviors out of these scenarios quite often. We think, oh, well, these things don't go on. We live in a sanitized world. We have sanitized rules. We've got governance. We've got systems, infrastructure, policies. We've got all these protections. And we're not focusing in on enough on what happens when you introduce stimuli to a human being. What is human behavior? How do typically human beings react to those different stimuli, whether that's pressure, whether that's a sense of being an accidental manager, an accidental leader, whether that's imposter syndrome, whether that's a lack of emotional intelligence, whether that's stuff going on at home, whether that's how you have been forged and how you show, whatever they are, we look to codify, and in doing so, we're attacking the causes and not the symptoms. And I think this reflection in this session around where the human being shows up in this and how we predict human behavior and how we compensate for it is a really critical element. So I'm happy to see that. I'm disappointed that that's the lived experience, but I'm happy to see that that's sort of feeding the conversation we're having.
I can add to that as a compliment that I think conversations around the why. I mean, Simon Sinek has introduced the idea that we're not talking about why we do what we do enough. For me, that's around the authentic purpose behind the organization and why it exists. And I think what I found is when you get a group of people who have all this diversity and complexity that we're talking about the very foundation of why the organization exists, then those types of conversations around, for example, why are we here? Well, we're here because we see that human beings are not happy in work. We've got 80% of the workforce globally that's disengaged. These kinds of facts need addressing. So what's actually going on? Now, we talk about why we've come together a lot. I'd say probably 40% of our engagement together is making sure that we're all coming from the same place. And what I find is when you're having conversations where it's about why we're here doing what we're doing, it strips away a lot of the prejudice. It strips away a lot of the negativity because it brings us to a common ground. And from that common ground, you can start to evaluate quite simply, well, why are we doing that? Because it's not serving that why. It's not serving the purpose of why we said we were going to come and work here. And we're not talking about the authentic purpose of the work that we're doing. HR, if I was to say to all the people in HR here today, what's the authentic purpose? What's the why that you got into HR? How many minutes of the day, how many hours of the week do you get to talk about why you started on that journey? Because that's for me is the replenishment. That for me is the connection to the deeper sense of, the spiritual reason why we're all here is to do something to help one another. And if we're not talking about how we're helping one another, and we're saying that's what we're all wanting to do here is help one another in this way, and that's what this organization was founded to do, then we're not building the foundation to address some of these more complex problems. That's a sincere view of mine and something I put into practice whenever I'm working with teams.
And I think the why is really important, Carlos, and it really connects to values. And I think doing work around values, I think for me, it's a question of vision, values, virtues. What is the bigger picture? So that's the vision. What are the values that underpin that vision? And what are those values in action? So if growth is something that we value, what does that actually look like in action on a daily basis? Well, that's going to look like creating a psychologically safe space where people are allowed to make mistakes. So I think for me, it's, what is the action? These values that, they're kind of intangible. What are the tangible action steps that it would take to bring these values to life?
Forgive me, Lisa. I've got to add another element of potency there. I've actually seen these conversations you're saying almost as antiviruses. If we see toxicity as a virus, a relational virus that really destroys people and organizations, then when you open up these dialogues, I don't know what it is, but it connects people to hope, it connects people to inspiration, it connects people to a deeper sense of their own selves. It isn't just about survival or the day-to-day living and the drudgery. It elevates people to a different place of understanding. And that actually, I think, radiates positivity, which dissolves a lot of the negative sense that people have of their lives and their situations. That's how important it is. It's like an antivirus having these conversations. It connects people in a different way and creates a different kind of relationship.
Well, absolutely. And I think when you're clear about what your values are, you get clearer on what your actions need to be, because every time you're about to think something, say something, do something, you ask yourself, is this taking me closer or further away from who I want to be or from the organization we want to be? And I think that is how incredibly important and anchoring values actually are.
Yeah, can I just answer that question or ask Ed to pick on it? Very important. I think, has it gone now? Where does oh yes, is there a point where one's authentic self needs to be filtered so it does not offend others? What a great question. Ed, can I hand that one over to you to answer?
Are you handing that to me for any particular reason?
No, not at all. I mean, I would like to hear what you, Sherry, and Lisa feel, but it's just you hadn't spoken recently.
Joking. I mean, I am I'm conscious of time actually, but B, in terms of that question specifically, I am in a space that's incredibly privileged, where for the first time in my career, I genuinely am speaking authentically. I'm using language that I would speak and use with people that I do in my daily life. I want to get at specific problems. I don't want any of the corporate nonsense that goes with it. I think that human beings are amazing, incredibly talented, can do incredible things, and that we put this, corporate wrap around them that inhibits performance as opposed to sets it up. So I'm in a position where I am saying it like it is, and it's incredibly liberating. However, in my corporate life, in my decade of transformation and change that I've just stepped out of, I didn't have those freedoms. And actually it rubbed up against the institution of power or people in, influencing positions, where I was seen as an upstart, an aggravator, a disruptor, and all of those things, because I'm constantly challenging the status quo. And that's the work that we do now, is how do we drive change? So there can be elements of conflict. I think my background helps me navigate conflict in that way, so that we can get where we need to go, and we can have conflicting agendas, and we can have differences of opinion, but actually the train's left the station. How are we getting to where we need to go? So that's how I'm sort of showing up for it at the minute.
Lisa and Sherry, just quick point on that one.
Well, I put a response in the chat just in response to that question. But actually, we've got 5 minutes left, and we've still got 8 slides to get through, guys. So, I'm going to move on a little bit to PERMA. So, Lisa.
Yeah, just for a quick moment to draw your attention to this, and you can find so much more about this online. But this is the central framework to human thriving. So again, if we can look to cultivate a culture of PERMA whereby people are experiencing those positive emotions, on a regular basis, you know, that sense of pride, sense of joy, sense of excitement, sense of connection to other human beings. It's the simple things that we can do on a daily basis, you know, cultivating that gratitude in your workplace. There's a really beautiful thing that somebody once suggested and implemented in their school, in fact, and every person in the organization had a secret guardian angel. So every person was allocated one other human being for whom they would secretly look out. They'd just leave little suggestions, little treats from time to time, maybe perhaps chocolate. They would just be out looking out for the emotional and psychological well-being of that one human being. I'm not saying you have to do something like that, but whatever you can do to help people connect in a genuine way, that is going to boost the level of connection and positive emotions in your workplace. Engagement. Oh, we've jumped slide.
Sorry,
Sure.
Lisa. Sorry. Do you want to go back?
Yes, please. Just for a second. Engagement. This is about helping people get into their flow. Human beings are at their best in work when the task at hand is neither too easy nor too difficult for them, but presents an optimal challenge to their skill set. That is when they're super focused, they're in their zone, they're doing their best work. It is the state of flow. Please take a peek at the psychology of this. We looked at the alpha relationships. This is the greatest predictor to human thriving, full stop. So whatever you can do to help nurture those relationships, create opportunities for people to connect. This is not a distraction. This is essential for our emotional, psychological, and even physical well-being. Sense of meaning and purpose. This is essential. Human thriving. We thought about, when looking at Maslow's pyramid, that the top of this was self-actualization. That's not actually true. They found that in later research after Maslow died, he was actually suggesting self-transcendence was the ultimate peak. That is when you are going above and beyond your own ego to give back to people in a meaningful way. You know, they say that human beings can perceive their work in one of three ways: a job, a career, or a vocation. Whatever we can do to help people get in touch with that sense of vocation, I think it's really helpful, you know. And how are people going to perceive that sense of vocation? No matter what they do, people like to see the small difference that their contribution can make to others. All too often we feel like a cog in a wheel, you know. What can we do to help people connect to that bigger picture and see the difference that they make on a daily basis? The final point, accomplishment. More than accomplishing goal after goal, because there's this thing in psychology called hedonic adaptation. And it means that no matter what we achieve in this life, we get used to it pretty quickly. So I don't think we should strive for goal after goal, if not that continual sense of growth. What can you do for the people around you to show them, to help them recognize that continual sense of progress, development? How can you help people celebrate those little wins on a regular basis? Because it's that sense of goal, of growth, rather than goal after goal accomplishment, that's going to really increase people's sense of well-being, I think. If you can help people create all of these 5 things, I think you're going to turn up the climate of well-being in your organization, but also psychological safety, you know, especially with the positive emotions and the relationships. Okay, over to you, Sherry. Sorry, next slide.
Thank you. It kind of carries on with you for a little while, Lisa. So yeah, I guess as quickly as you can in the few minutes we've got left.
Probably enough of my voice. Ed, Carlos, did you have anything to say about these? When a culture lacks PERMA, or anything you've observed, experienced that really?
Yeah, I would just say the link to that poll is in the chat around PERMA. I think it's a fantastic model. And I think it's really useful, particularly for a HR audience, to look and really challenge, you know, because at a high level, you know, positive emotions, relationships, and so, but really to sort of dotted line to the strategy, to the tactics, to the approach. How are we maximizing PERMA as a model, and how are we asking ourselves difficult questions about how well we create those different 5 environments, or those different 5 moments in the journey, is a really powerful way for leaders to start to look at how they're drawing together meaningful change and meaningful interventions.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, I mean, Lisa, I guess you've kind of covered the positive emotion side of it. Just some stats there, really, that help to understand how to build that out. I think what I'll do is, I mean, I'll make sure the slides go out to everyone, because obviously we've still got a few left, so people can sort of dig into that afterwards, if that's all right with you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we've
Would
put
it
a
be
list of resources on the chat as we've gone. So we'll sort of consolidate all those resources, because they're really helpful topics, and people can have those as well.
So I think, Lisa and Ed, do you want to have a quick sort of go over this one? Because I think this is quite a significant one.
Yeah, meaning in work. I mean, it's one of the greatest predictors to whether a member of staff will be there in a year from now, whether they perceive that sense of meaning. Much of the meaning, again, it's about bigger picture stuff. How does the individual contribute to the bigger picture? But also, there was some really interesting statistic on having a best friend at work was really very likely to keep you in that job. So again, it comes down to what can you do to encourage people to have those good relationships. Yeah, we know meaning makes people more productive, resilient, better health. Again, it's positive emotions, meaning, relationships, the absolute key. Would it be useful at this stage just to share a few questions or takeaways? I know we're over time here, Sharon.
Yeah, so next up, we've then got the poll question. So Ed, have you got the poll available for anyone that's sort of happy to hang around for a few more minutes?
Absolutely. It's in the chat now.
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of almost rushed through it. It felt like it was, my voice is going, halfway through before we started to really get into momentum, didn't it? And it's such a wide topic, and we could talk about this all day.
No,
But
I
it'd be
think
great.
it was worth it. You know, you
Yeah.
can have death by PowerPoint, can't you? I think the points that we made and the conversations that we had were reflective of the conversation in the chat and some of the key topics that people were drawing out. So I really think that allowing that time to just be agile and go with the flow is actually a really great way of role modeling that we're here to have genuine, authentic conversations to explore those topics. And a lot came out. People were sharing a lot of stuff in the chat, and we'll capture all of that as well as the resources. So I really enjoyed having that much more organic conversation.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can do a follow-up session as well. I think it'd be great to keep the conversation going and bring people back and you know, have even more interaction. Would be lovely.
Yeah.
Right, so while that poll is running as well, just said, you know, if you can give us any examples in the chat of what you might want to implement following the session, it'd be great just for us to have some feedback. Anything you felt was particularly useful from today.
The chat's already full of some incredible comments, which is really nice to.
I mean, look at that one there, Ed. Thank you so much. I have learned a lot, and I feel better and not alone. Wow.
Amazing. Well, that's
amazing.
Thank you.
How beautiful is that? Thank you very much, whoever posted that. That makes us feel that what we're doing has value and meaning. That's really wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, we are also passionate about what we do. I'll make sure all of the slides go out. I'll make sure all of the links to the resources go out as well to everyone that's registered. So it'll all be available. And please do connect with us on LinkedIn and find our MOCHA group on there as well. We'd love to just keep this conversation going.
Yeah, I think we can cover off some of the elements that we didn't. And so let's do that. Let's continue the conversation on our LinkedIn group then.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you all so much. It's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Bye-bye. You're welcome. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.